Welcome, we hope you enjoy your stay here with Gale of Tales.
Blood and Stone. Origin. Written by Lena Simone. Part 5. Tethered. Delaney's fingers hovered over her phone, hesitating for a moment before pressing the call button. The tension was unmistakable, and the cool night air seemed to amplify every sound. They could hear the rustle of the wind through the trees, the distant hum of cicadas, and the faint creak of the gazebo's wooden frame under their weight. The phone rang twice before Sylvie's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Laney. Yeah, it's me," Delaney said, in a firm voice. "We found it. We have the box." Sylvie exhaled audibly. "Good. That's good. And you're safe?" "For now," Delaney said, as she glanced at Kieran nervously fidgeting with the strap of her watch. "But we saw them. The Draugr. They nearly caught us." There was a pause on the other end, then in a steady tone, Sylvie replied, "They won't stop. Not until we send them back. Do you have the magnifier?" "Of course. Why wouldn't we be looking for something called the magnifier?" Kieran said, crossing her arms, her eyes focused on Delaney. No. We have the box, but we haven't opened it," Delaney said to Sylvie, but looking at her sister. "We haven't had the chance." Kieran couldn't stop herself from chiming in. "Haven't had the chance? Why are you being so nonchalant? Tell her. We literally just stopped running from those things." Delaney shot her a look, and Kieran lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "What? You know this isn't normal, right?" Sylvie's tone softened, though the urgency in her words remained. "The amulet, it's the key to activating the stone's full power. Open the box, and wrap the amulet around your left wrist, but only with Kieran present. Once you have, call me back. I'll guide you from there." Delaney glanced at Kieran, who raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but how?" Sylvie interrupted sharply. "Hurry." The line went dead before Delaney could respond. She stared at the screen, pretending her heart was not hammering in her chest. "Did you tell Demon Nana about me?" Kieran asked, as Delaney slid her phone into her back pocket. "Stop it. And no, I just told her I wouldn't do this alone," Delaney responded, reaching for the bag that held the box. "Well, how did she know I was with you?" Delaney answered quickly. "Welcome to my life. That's what I have been trying to tell you. There is so much I can't explain. And Sylvie Hart is only a piece of it." "Right," Kieran muttered, her earlier skepticism almost completely gone. She leaned forward to peer into the bag. "Okay, well, go on then. Let's get this over with." Delaney pulled the wooden box out of the bag carefully, its surface worn, but carved with detailed swirling designs, and faintly glowing symbols. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the bench between them. Kieran leaned closer, her expression a mix of fear and curiosity. "Do it," she whispered. Delaney lifted the amulet from its nest. It was cool to the touch, but unlike the stone's volatile energy, this was grounding, calming, like a still current beneath turbulent waves. She delicately wrapped the chain around her left wrist, gripping the body of the amulet in the palm of her hand. "How did we end up in an episode of Stranger Things? This is too much," Kieran said sarcastically, though it was layered with anxiety. Before Delaney could answer, the runes flared. A pale light burst outward in a silent ripple, washing over the gazebo, and stretching beyond. The world around them changed, but not violently. It was like the quiet of dawn breaking after an endless night. At first, it was subtle, just a shimmer, like sunlight wavering over stone. Then the air thickened, slow and weighted, as if the world had paused to listen. Suddenly, figures appeared. Dozens at first. Then, what seemed like hundreds. They did not arrive, it was more like they revealed themselves, rising into visibility like mist burning off in morning light. Not conjured, but unveiled. As if they had always been there, waiting just beyond the reach of human sight. Each one stood vigilant, their bodies outlined in a soft, cold light that pulsed in time with the amulet now blazing in Delaney's hand. They weren't ghosts. They weren't echoes. These were soldiers, real, grounded in something more ancient than time. Their armor, forged in a forgotten age, was made of weathered iron and darkened bronze, shaped into breastplates, shoulder guards, and spiked bracers. Across their broad shoulders were thick, dark furs that Delaney imagined were pelts of formidable extinct beasts bested in battle. There was complex knotwork and runes etched into the metal, symbols that pulsed with a faint, ethereal light. Each grasped broad-bladed swords, and spears tipped with similar otherworldly energy, that glowed with an icy blue luminescence. Their shields, round and emblazoned with glowing runes, rested against their spectral forms. Standing among the soldiers was a warrior unlike the rest. He was taller and larger, his frame broad and muscled, built for both war and endurance. Steel caught the light in fractured glimmers, but his face remained mostly in shadow. Delaney found herself straining to catch what little the light revealed. She caught flashes, a hard line of jaw beneath a short blonde beard, the suggestion of high cheekbones, the glint of eyes as cold and sharp as a frozen sea. Strands of long, wind-tangled hair slid forward, catching the light before vanishing back into darkness. Each glimpse felt fleeting, like trying to piece together a face from fragments in a dream. But his eyes are what captured her the most. They seemed to freeze you in place in both awe and fear. They locked onto Delaney, burning with purpose, with recognition. Strapped across his back was a sword unlike the others, longer, heavier, its blade slightly curved at the tip. The metal shimmered with a faint golden sheen beneath the runes carved along its length. It looked like it had tasted both gods and monsters. It seemed to hum, as if alive. Delaney's breath caught. Every part of her body tensed, as though remembering something her mind couldn't name. Behind him, the soldiers didn't stir, but the weight of their presence pressed inward, ready and absolute. Delaney's voice came quiet but clear. "I think," she said, her gaze locked on the solitary figure ahead, "that is what we're missing." The amulet's glow began to fade. Slowly, the vision, or whatever it had been, unwound like smoke. The figures shimmered, lost shape, then disappeared. Only the night remained, still and soft, but charged now. As if the very air had thinned and thickened all at once, and whatever line separated reality from myth had blurred. Delaney exhaled, a shaky breath she hadn't meant to hold. Kieran, fingers white against the edge of the bench, lifted her gaze slowly. Their eyes met. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. "We need to call her back," Kieran said at last, her voice low and steady, like she was still catching up to what her heart already understood. "Now." Delaney didn't hesitate. She pulled her phone from her back pocket once more, the screen lighting her face in sterile blue as she scrolled to Sylvie's name. She hit the call, and Sylvie immediately answered. "Did you see?" Sylvie's voice came sharp, calm, but layered, like something tightly coiled just beneath her breath. Delaney glanced at Kieran, who gave a slow, solemn nod. "Oh, we saw," she said. There was a pause on the line. Sylvie took a breath, then said, "Good, they are ready. Listen carefully," her tone sharp as a blade. "Meet me at Renwick Hospital. The Draugr will follow the energy surge, and that's where we'll perform the banishment ritual. The hospital's residual energy, its death imprint, makes it the perfect place to seal the veil." Delaney's spine stiffened. "Back to Renwick? We just left, and I thought you couldn't go there." The silence on the line thickened, then cracked. "The situation has changed with the retrieval of the magnifier," Sylvie said, her voice now hard as iron. "The gate is no longer dormant. That flare of light, they'll have seen it, felt it. We don't have the luxury of time anymore. We lure them there, and we end this before they get strong enough to breach the veil completely. Bring the stone and the amulet. Don't delay." "What about protection? How will we hold them off?" Delaney asked, her pulse quickening. "I'll explain the ritual when we're together," Sylvie said. "But once we start, there's no turning back." Delaney felt her chest tighten. Images flashed in her mind, of the Draugr's ashen faces, of the burning runes, of the host of spectral warriors that had vanished with the light. The fear clawed at her, but beneath it, something else stirred, a resolve in Delaney that she didn't understand. "We're on our way," she said quietly, ending the call. Kieran was already gathering their things, her jaw tight with determination. "Let's go before the night decides to turn against us." As they stepped out of the gazebo and into the deepening dark, the shadows seemed to watch them, creeping longer behind their heels. But around Delaney's wrist, the amulet pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, steady and strong. Whatever waited at Renwick, it was already awake. And it knew they were coming. When the sisters reached the decrepit remains of Renwick Hospital, the Gothic structure loomed like a skeletal sentinel against the night. Its jagged spires and hollow, arched windows were like watchful, dead eyes peering into the abyss. Vines snaked along the weathered stone, their gnarled roots splitting the facade. Moonlight, a ghostly white, filtered through shattered glass, casting eerie, shifting shadows across the broken path leading to the main entrance. Inside, the air was thick, damp, and heavy with the scent of mold and mildew. As Delaney and Kieran navigated the pretzeled halls and corroded stairways, the hospital's decayed corridors groaned and echoed with their hushed footsteps. Their flashlights carved nervous paths through the oppressive darkness. Sylvie's instructions had been precise. A specific room in the eastern wing held the power they needed to complete the ritual. "I hate this place. It feels alive," Kieran whispered, her flashlight beam trembling in her hand, dancing across the crumbling walls. Delaney nodded, and a chill seeped into her bones that had nothing to do with the damp air. In the eastern wing, they found Sylvie standing by a broken window. She was still, but somehow exuded a quiet ferocity that seemed to both belong to, and defy the darkness around her. As she walked to meet the sisters in the center of the room, her long coat, matte black and cinched at the waist, swept the cracked linoleum like the wings of a raven. Strapped tightly across her torso was a harness of obsidian-hued leather, crisscrossed with sheaths that held twin daggers. Their handles were carved with runes matching those on the stone Delaney now held. She looked more like a badass assassin than the nurse Delaney met only days ago. "The stone," Sylvie said, as she stretched her hand out toward Delaney. She nodded in Kieran's direction. "Glad you're here," she said in a stern voice. Delaney did not hesitate to give the stone to Sylvie this time. She took it out immediately, and handed it over. "That makes one of us," Kieran said nervously, and under her breath. Sylvie did not respond. Instead, she focused on the stone she now gripped in her gloved palm. Suddenly, it began to pulse, illuminating the room in brief, ghostly flashes. With each flicker, the steel from the curve of her blades, the buckles of her gear, and the faint outline of a medallion resting just below her collarbone, caught glints of light. Delaney now noticed the assortment of pouches, charms, and weathered relics hanging from Sylvie's waist, each one looking like it carried a purpose. "Laney, the magnifier," Sylvie said, her voice low, echoing against the peeling plaster and broken tile. Delaney revealed the object she cupped carefully in both hands. Its soft glow met the light of the stone, and for a moment, the room seemed to breathe, a current of something unseen stirring the air. Sylvie's eyes darted to the hallway behind them, then back. "Good," she said. "We don't have long." She turned toward the back wall, where a crude circle had been drawn in chalk and ash, lined with intricate markings and symbols that crawled across the floor like a summoning net. At the center of it, a metal bowl waited, already filled with dried herbs, a scrap of linen, and something darker. "This is elaborate," Delaney said. "When did you have time to do all this? When did you get here?" Sylvie once again did not respond. She walked to the circle and grabbed one of the pouches dangling from her waist. Kieran stepped forward, her voice tentative. "What's the plan?" Sylvie allowed herself a breath, then responded, "We're binding the veil before the Draugr arrive. When they do, and they will, you hold the perimeter. Whatever happens, don't let them into this circle." Sylvie pointed firmly at the circle she had drawn on the ground. "If they breach it, the ritual fails. And we lose everything." She then knelt, setting the glowing stone into the center of the circle. The runes brightened instantly, and the shadows beyond the cracked window began to stir violently. "They're coming," Sylvie said, her voice steady despite the palpable tension in the air. "I can feel the veil thinning. We must make our stand. Now." The temperature in the room plummeted. The warmth was sucked out in a breathless instant, replaced by a deathly chill that made their lungs ache and their limbs lock. Frost bloomed in spiderweb patterns across the walls, racing outward with unnatural speed. It crept over the ritual circle, the iron bowl, even the chalk symbols, which hissed faintly as the ice kissed their edges. The air grew sharp and brittle, each breath puffed pale clouds that drifted slow and uneven. Delaney's chest tightened, her fingers curled into fists at her sides as she fought the instinct to step back. Next to her, Kieran's eyes darted wildly, her lips parted as though to speak, only to close again. Then came the sound. It started as a low, grinding hum from beneath their feet, an alien vibration that came from no living thing. Almost instantly, it twisted into a chorus of guttural snarls and rasping moans from the Draugr. It sounded like a symphony of ancient death and frozen malice. The sounds clawed at Delaney and Kieran's senses, a chaotic blend of cracking ice and the grinding of bone. Each guttural expulsion echoed like a heartbeat far too big for the human world, vibrating in their chests and making their head ache. Delaney clamped her hands over her ears, and Kieran stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. Sylvie, however, stood firm. One gloved hand shifted toward the hilt of a dagger at her hip, the other tightened into a fist around the charms that hung from her belt. She didn't flinch, even as the walls seemed to close in around them. It was as if the hospital had become a living conduit, channeling something vast and terrible, something clawing its way into this world. And then it happened. The veil tore. Reality buckled inward, folding like a curtain being drawn back. A long, gaping rupture bloomed in the center of the room, like a jagged wound suspended in the air. From the fissure poured a swirling, black mist, dense, frigid, and writhing like smoke laced with soul fire. It rushed out across the floor, extinguishing what little warmth remained, and figures suddenly emerged. They came first as shifting shapes in the dark, thin and wavering, like smoke trying to remember its form. Then the details settled, and grim bodies draped in relics of a long-forgotten war came into view. What little flesh they had left was stretched thin over bone, and their skin was as pale as something long shut away from the sun. Hollow cheeks sank above locked jaws, and eyes, burning red from deep within shadowed sockets, fixed on their prey without blinking. Their limbs, all harsh angles and unnatural bends, moved with the precise, patient grace of a predator. Suddenly, the air carried a smell that made Delaney's stomach turn. It smelled like damp earth and iron, the stink of graves cracked open before their time. Their armor, splintered at the edges and rusted at the seams, and groaned and scraped with each motion. Across their breastplates and shields, faint runes flickered in and out of sight in a sinister ember glow, as if stirred by some unseen breath. Their axes, swords, and spears bore the same glowing crimson marks, etched deep. The steel was blackened and scarred, but it pulsed faintly, like something alive, something waiting. And then there was the one who clearly led them. He stood in behind the others, towering above them, his presence bending the air like heat over stone. Jagged plates of blackened steel clung to his frame, each one battered but unbroken, their edges catching the pale, spectral light in fleeting, wicked glints. A crown of 3 spikes rose from his helm, curving upward like thorns wrenched from the bones of the earth, cruel and uneven in their shape. Where a face should have been, there was only shadow, thick, depthless, swallowing the light around it. From within that darkness, 2 eyes burned red, steady and unyielding. They didn't flicker. They didn't waver. They watched with the kind of hunger that didn't belong to the living, the kind that made the air feel heavier in the chest, as though it wanted to root you in place for whatever came next. The sword he carried was a colossal thing. It was wide, chipped, and brutal. Its edge hissed through the air with each movement, leaving a wake of frost in its path. The metal was laced with veins of glowing ember light that pulsed in time with the hum now consuming the room. With each step the massive creature took, the walls shuddered, as if the bones of the hospital knew what had come to claim them. Delaney and Kieran stood frozen, the amulet pulsing wildly against Delaney's palm like a frantic heartbeat. Even Sylvie, weapons drawn, seemed momentarily dwarfed by the scale of the threat before them. Do not give in to your fear. And do not, for any reason, break this circle. She whispered, her voice low and strained. Not until I say. If you do, we're already dead. Sylvie stepped forward, her voice rising in a rhythmic incantation, thick with age and power. The chant echoed off the shattered walls of the hospital, and vibrated through the dust-choked air. As the final syllables fell from her lips, the runes on the amulet ignited with golden fire, casting an otherworldly light that pulsed outward in waves, burning through shadow. The veil split again, not gently, but like a wound torn wide with force and purpose. From the light, stepped a figure, who made the air seem to still. Delaney and Kieran both gasped. "It's him," Delaney whispered. Kieran nodded, and in a low whisper, she said, "The warrior." This time, Delaney got a good look at him. His broad, chiseled frame bore the scars of countless battles. Wide pauldrons, capped in iron, and overlaid with thick black fur, gave him the silhouette of something more beast than man. His bracers, forged of blackened iron, were skillfully carved. And around his waist was a thick, rune-etched belt, with a buckle shaped like a snarling wolf's jaw. His leather kilt, reinforced with hammered plates, swayed heavily with each step. He now wore a helmet crowned with twin horns, and etched with glowing sigils. Unlike the Draugr, these symbols glowed a blinding white, reminding Delaney of the glare of sunlight on fresh snow, beautiful, but sharp enough to hurt if you looked too long. Thin bands of steel hugged the leather at his ankle, and a row of small iron studs marched along the edge of the soles of his curved steel toe boots. His eyes still burned, but not just with purpose or recognition, this time, with fury. Behind him, his spectral army materialized from the breach. Bound to his will, their ghostly armor flickered like a heat mirage, their weapons glowing as if forged from starlight. They stood ready. He raised his axe, a brutal, two-handed weapon that pulsed with ancient magic, its massive blade stained from wars fought beyond the mortal veil. "Hold your ground," he commanded, his voice deep as the earth and sharp as thunder. The stones trembled. The Draugr snarled in response, their twisted forms seemed to recoil at the force of his presence. The veil still rippled violently behind him, but the light no longer flickered, it surged. The room erupted into chaos. The Draugr surged forward like a tide of rotted armor and bone, howling with rage that seemed to claw at the walls. Their guttural cries ricocheted off the crumbling plaster, folding into the clash of metal and the splintering of old stone. At the front, the warrior roared, a sound less like a man and more like what Delaney imagined the Big Bang might have sounded like. His axe swept wide, carving through the first Draugr with a sickening ease that sent bone fragments spinning through the air. Behind him, his soldiers flooded in, their ethereal blades slicing through undead flesh like fire licking dry parchment. Sylvie was a shadow made of muscle and intent, her black-clad form weaving through the melee. Her sword gleamed with its own light, arcs of silver that sang through the air. One stroke severed a Draugr's arm, the next split its chest with brutal elegance. Her eyes were locked, cold, unblinking, each move a precision honed from years of anger folded into silence. As the Draugr advanced toward the sisters, Delaney and Kieran fought back to back, securing the circle. Delaney's hands trembled around the pole she gripped, raw adrenaline surging beneath her skin, but she didn't let go. She swung with everything she had, the pole cracking against a Draugr's skull. It staggered, dazed but snarling. She gritted her teeth, then screamed as she shoved the pole beneath its chin, and drove upward. The Draugr's neck snapped with a brittle crack, its armor collapsing into a heap of rusted plates. Kieran was relentless. You would have never known how scared she was only moments ago. She moved with the desperation of someone who knew fear too well to let it stop her. Her weapon, a broken pipe wrapped in wire, wasn't pretty, but it hit like a grudge. She smashed it into a Draugr's ribs, the impact releasing a sound like stepping on dry ice. The Draugr lunged, clawing. Kieran ducked low, sweeping its legs out, and brought the pipe down in a savage arc toward its skull. But this time, she was too slow. Another Draugr, unseen, caught her in the side. Its jagged blade scraped across her ribs, not deep, but enough. She gasped as the shock of it buckled her, pain lighting up her nerves. Her hand slipped on the blood-slick pipe as she staggered back. "No, Kieran," Delaney's voice cracked. She spun, deflecting a Draugr that had closed in, her pole slamming into its shoulder. With her other hand, she reached for her sister, dragging her back as another Draugr's sword hissed past where Kieran had just been. Delaney's arms shook, but she didn't let go. "Kier, stay with me," she hissed. Sylvie was already there. She didn't break stride. She didn't even look. Her blade carved through a Draugr's throat as she reached down, grabbed Kieran by the collar, and yanked her upright. "Move," Sylvie barked, her tone sharp enough to cut through the chaos. Kieran's breath hitched, but she forced her legs to work. Her side screamed, her shirt soaked in red, but she didn't fall. Delaney was at her flank, holding the line, while Sylvie fought ahead, slashing a path through the tightening press of Draugr. The hospital groaned again, as if the bones of the building was protesting the war unfolding within. Cracks spider-webbed overhead, releasing a soft rain of plaster dust. Shards of glass exploded from the trembling windows, catching the rune fire light as they spun like tiny, jagged stars. In the eye of the storm, the warrior met the Draugr leader. They collided with a force that seemed to bend the air itself. The Draugr's sword, a fang of iron wrapped in writhing red mist, sliced through the shadows, each swing a promise of death. The warrior answered in kind, his axe a cyclone of raw brutality, every blow wild yet deliberate. "Glamir," the warrior said through gritted teeth. "Of course it's you, still defending the defenseless I see," the appalling creature responded. They circled, not with grace, but with the weight of the imminent fact that one of them wouldn't leave this room standing. The Draugr lunged low, its strike meant to end the fight in one brutal sweep. But the warrior sprang back, his boots grinded against the stone, and he answered with a vicious upward slash. A clash of steel rang out, sharp and harsh, a sound that made Delaney's ears ring and teeth ache. The Draugr twisted its blade, catching the warriors with a jarring clang, and for a moment they were locked together with their faces close, and muscles straining. Then, the Draugr's weapon slipped, slicing a shallow gash across the warrior's ribs. He didn't so much as flinch. Instead, his mouth curved into a feral and dangerous grin. Then in one sudden motion he stomped forward, driving his boot down on the Draugr's weapon hand, pinning it to the stone. His other foot slammed against the creature's chest, forcing it back with the weight of a mountain. With a roar, he hooked his boot beneath its jaw, driving it upward, and wrenching the Draugr's head back at a sickening angle. The sound of snapping bone echoed like a gunshot. The creature sagged, its red eyes flickering once before going dark. Only then did the warrior wrench his axe free, the blade dripping with the end of something that should have stayed buried. In the chaos, Kieran's hand closed around the stone. She sucked in a breath at the shock of it. It wasn't just cold, it was the kind of cold that burned, seeping through skin, threading along nerves, winding its way into her blood. Every instinct told her to let go, but her fingers wouldn't obey. The stone pulsed steady now, its white light solid, unblinking. Beside her, Delaney's hand found the amulet. The jolt that surged through her wasn't pain. It was recognition, like remembering something she'd never known she'd forgotten. Power threaded through her, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The clang of steel, the roar of battle, the Draugr's snarls, all of it narrowed to a single point where two sisters stood together, holding their ground against the dark. It was almost like the world seemed to tilt. It wasn't the building groaning or the Draugr's relentless shrieks. It was deeper, a shift in gravity, in certainty, like the universe had inhaled, waiting to see what she would do. The amulet pulsed, a low hum vibrating through Delaney's bones. She could feel it sinking with her heartbeat, filling her lungs, surging into every raw nerve stretched thin from fear. "Kier, hold on," Delaney said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. Kieran's breath was ragged, her face pale, but her hand tightened around Delaney's wrist. "I'm not going anywhere," Kieran grit out. Sylvie stood over them, blade ready, eyes flicking to the stone. She said nothing, but her body shifted closer, protective, as if shielding them from what was coming. Draugr closed in from every side, their weapons gleaming in the ruin-lit dark. And then light exploded, not in a burst, but in a steady, unstoppable rise, as if the room itself were filling with dawn. It wasn't blinding, but it was absolute. Shadows recoiled into the corners like things afraid of being seen. The Draugr faltered, their snarls stuttering into something that almost sounded like fear. The light crawled up Delaney's arms, leapt across to Kieran, and wrapped itself around Sylvie in fine threads of luminous silver. Runes blazed to life along the cracked walls, their light pulsing like a heartbeat in the room, and the air turned sharp on the tongue, tasting like metal and frost mingling in every breath. "Delaney, now!" Sylvie yelled. Delaney didn't know how she knew what to do, but she did. Her body obeyed before her mind could question. She raised the amulet high, and as she did, her eyes flared with a blinding white glow, and her breath quickened. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of something vast and other, settling into her bones. Words rose in her throat, harsh and fluid, a language she had never heard, and yet somehow understood, and spoke with conviction. She began to chant, the syllables rolling from her tongue like they'd been waiting there all her life. The light surged at her call, streaming from the amulet into a pillar that split the ceiling's cracks wider. Kieran, steadying herself against Sylvie, slammed her palm against the stone, feeding it her own heartbeat, her spilled blood, and her own defiant will. The light sharpened. It didn't explode outward, it cut through the room, slicing through Draugr with lines of pure white that stitched the air. Where the light passed, Draugr didn't just fall. They crumbled, armor turning to ash, and bones disintegrating into the ruin-stained floor. Their death cries never made it past their throats. The leader saw the fate of his army and roared in anger. He motioned toward the sisters, but it was too late. The warrior didn't miss his opening. He roared forward, his axe propelled by something beyond muscle, beyond fury, a tether to the stone's power. His strike landed at the exact moment the light reached the Draugr. As steel met bone, and light met shadow, the Draugr's form unraveled. His cursed blade clattered to the ground, as his body folded into dust and mist. And just like that, the tide stopped. The Draugr were gone. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Dust hung in the air like ghosts reluctant to leave. Delaney dropped to her knees, the amulet's glow softened, and her breaths came in shaky bursts. Kieran followed, clutching her side, gritting through the pain with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. That was different, Kieran muttered, slumping against Delaney's shoulder. Sylvie stood over them, sword lowered now, but her gaze was still sharp, scanning the quiet as if daring it to turn on them again. "Mena Barn," Sylvie said in a compassionate tone, as she kneeled beside them. "You did well." Delaney looked down at the amulet she now wore around her neck, its glow now faint, but steady. Like it had chosen. "We're not done, are we?" Delaney asked quietly. Sylvie shook her head. "No. This was just the beginning, I'm afraid." The ground trembled beneath them, a low, guttural shudder that felt like the building's last breath. "We need to move," Sylvie said, already slicing through a fallen beam with a single, decisive strike. "Now." Delaney didn't hesitate. She looped her arm around Kieran's waist, hoisting her up as best she could. Kieran's breath hitched, a sharp intake through gritted teeth, but she didn't argue. They stumbled forward, the walls around them cracking and peeling like the hospital itself was unraveling. Dust clouded the air, turning every breath into a struggle. Shards of glass rained down, catching the faint, flickering light of the amulet. The room behind them caved in with a roar, swallowing the space where they had fought only moments ago. "Feels like the whole place is coming down," Delaney said, tightening her grip on Kieran. "You think?" Kieran coughed, forcing a grin through the haze of pain. The staircase ahead was a wreck, half collapsed, hanging in jagged, splintered sections. But it was the only way out. Sylvie was already halfway up, finding impossible footholds, motioning them forward. Delaney and Kieran scrambled after her, each movement sent tremors through the fragile structure. The moment their hands reached the landing, the staircase gave way behind them, plunging into the collapsing abyss. They breathlessly held onto the landing. Then a hand seized her wrist. It wasn't a grab, it was a command. Solid, unyielding, as if the earth itself had reached up to take hold of her. A second hand snatched Kieran by the back of her jacket, jerking them both upwards with a force that didn't ask permission. The warrior didn't grunt. He didn't struggle. He simply lifted them, as though gravity had no claim. Delaney's feet hit the landing hard, but she barely felt it. Kieran was next, steadied by the same hands that had wrenched them from the collapsing abyss. The warrior stood between them and the void, his broad frame braced against the shifting ground, his grip a lifeline carved from the heavens. Ahead, a doorway split open through the wreckage, moonlight poured through like a path carved just for them. Delaney didn't hesitate. She locked her arm around Kieran, dragging her forward toward that light, her legs moved before her mind could catch up. Sylvie was at their backs, urging them on as the hospital shuddered, collapsing inwards with a groan of defeat that chased them to the threshold. They burst through the doorway just as the ruin gave its final breath, folding in on itself with a deafening roar. Dust and debris flared out behind them, but they were already clear, stumbling into the cold, biting air of night. They spilled out onto the cold grass, coughing, and choking on dust. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Sylvie was the first to move. She stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on Delaney's shoulder. Her fingers were firm and grounding. "It's over," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. Delaney nodded slowly. The words felt distant, fragile in her ears. Her legs barely remembered how to hold her. But Kieran wasn't ready to believe it. She pushed herself upright, wincing, her gaze scanning the ruin of the hospital. The dust had settled, but the shadows still seemed to whisper. The silence didn't feel like peace, it felt like a held breath. "Is it?" Kieran asked, her voice sharp in the quiet. A deeper voice answered from behind them. "For now." The warrior stepped from the dust, his presence filling the broken space with a calm weight. His voice came low and certain. "But there will always be forces seeking to breach the veil. The balance must be protected." Kieran turned to him, her usual defiance replaced with something quieter. She was more serious than Delaney had ever seen her. "Unreal. Vidar?" Kieran asked, squinting at him through the haze. "You are?" "Yes." He nodded, the name settling into the air like a truth that had always been there. He turned toward Sylvie, a wry smile tugged at the edge of his lips. "Told you." Sylvie raised an eyebrow, curious. "How did you know?" she asked, as she tilted her head toward Kieran. Kieran, still catching her breath, gave a tired grin. "Cultural anthropology. And the boot thing." Vidar's smile deepened. "I knew you would be the first." Delaney's breath caught in her throat. She looked from Kieran to Sylvie, to Vidar, as though 1,000 unspoken questions had suddenly found voices, and none of them were making sense. Her wide eyes locked on Sylvie, raw and searching. "First?" she asked. "Okay. No. You said you'd tell me everything, about the stone, about you, about us. Now would be a good time." Sylvie's expression softened. For a heartbeat, she looked younger, vulnerable, like the weight she carried was too old for her bones. Her gaze drifted past Delaney, distant, as though she were staring into memories only she could see. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. It was lower and interlaced in sorrow. "There are stories we were never supposed to remember," Sylvie said, her hand brushing the hilt of her sword absent-mindedly. "Truths buried so deep the world convinced itself they were myths. The stone, the Draugr, Vidar, this wasn't the beginning. And it's not the end." Her eyes flicked back to Delaney, sharp and steady. "For the record, we were both right," she said, smirking at Vidar. He gave a knowing grin, and as she turned her gaze back to Delaney, the look in her eyes softened. She said, "My name is Solveig." Her eyes flickered, glistening with emotions she had long kept hidden. "Your grandmother," she paused, gathering her emotions, "my daughter, Elsa, was our whole world. Leaving her was the hardest thing Vidar and I ever had to do. But we had no choice." "Wait, our grandmother, your daughter? How?" Delaney asked. Sylvie paused a moment, and when she spoke, it was as though she was remembering something so far away, it might slip from her grasp if she didn't hold it tightly. "I was born in a village so small, the wind carried more stories than the people," she said softly. "But our family, we were keepers of something old. We never called it magic. It was tradition, sacred, passed through the blood." She paused, the weight of memory settling in her chest. "I could read the runes before I could write my name. They whispered to me when I touched them, telling me things no child should understand. That's how I knew the world wasn't just what we could see, there were cracks in it, slivers where the light bled through from something older. Holier even, or hungrier, maybe." Vidar remained still, listening, his arms crossed, not with indifference, but with reverence. "In my 20s, I was asked to guard something ancient. An artifact, tied to the gods. I was warned it would draw attention. And it did." Her gaze moved to Vidar. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. He appeared like a storm in the snow. Not as a man, but as something so much more. A god. I didn't believe it at first. I thought he was there to take what I was protecting. And he was. Vidar spoke, his voice deep and rich with memory. "I came for the artifact. It belonged to the Aesir. But she." His eyes lingered on her. I found her fascinating. She didn't back down. No mortal had ever stood in my path like that. No mortal had ever made me question my orders. Solvay's smile faded, her voice trembled as she continued. We fought. He, or he may say I, proved to be a worthy opponent, and slowly, the lines blurred. I saw the pain he carried, the loneliness, the honor he clung to like a sword. And he saw in me more than duty. He saw me. She swallowed hard. We didn't mean to fall in love. But we did, and it was the kind that doesn't burn out. It etches. Vidar spoke, his voice carried the weight of something ancient, threaded with a deep, aching sorrow. I laid down my place among the gods. Became something smaller, something mortal. I took a mortal name and stayed at her side. Not as a warrior, but as a man, a husband and father. Solvay nodded slowly. Our daughter. She was everything, the best parts of us. She was wild and curious. She was our joy, and our terror. Delaney's eyes filled with tears she hadn't realized were coming. So what happened? She asked. Why leave her? Solvay's eyes shimmered, as she answered, because power like ours leaves a trail. And our love, our family, it rang like a bell through the realms. The veil, already thinning, became unstable in our presence. Dark things stirred. A Draugr warlord nearly broke through. Vidar narrowed his eyes. He said, Glamir. Sylvie nodded, furrowed her brows, and continued, but we did not defeat him, we only restrained him. And knew he would be back to finish what he started. Vidar continued, his jaw tight. We knew if we stayed, Elsa would never have a life. We were already being hunted. They would have come for her next. So we chose the only thing we could. Solvay's voice dropped to a whisper, splintering at the edges. We let her go. She looked at Delaney and Kieran. We left when your mother was 3. We gave Elsa, your mother, and all of you, a new story. A safer one. And we watched from the other side, from the shadows. Hoping, praying, crying. Every time you hurt, we felt it. Every time you laughed, we ached. Vidar placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Solvay continued, Elsa became the kind of mother we hoped she'd be. Strong, fierce, protective. She passed on what she could. The traditions, the rituals, not realizing they were shields in disguise. Solvay stepped forward now, closer to Delaney and Kieran. You're not just our grandchildren. You're the legacy we bled for. The reason we broke our own hearts. The reason we never came back. Delaney's breath shuddered, her hands trembling. So you gave up your happiness and a lifetime with her to protect her life, and ours? Solvay nodded. Delaney and Kieran exchanged stunned glances, their minds raced, struggling to process the impossible truth they had just heard. The immense weight of Solvay and Vidar's words pressed heavily on them, leaving a tense, aching silence in the air. Slowly, they turned back to face the pair, their voices overlapping, filled with raw disbelief. What legacy? Vidar's gaze softened, his imposing figure tempered by a quiet sadness. He nodded, the gesture solemn and deliberate. Solvay stepped closer, her shimmering eyes locking onto theirs with a mixture of profound love and deep regret. Our tradition, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. You are protectors. Did she, or Mom, know about any or all of this? Because, a second ago, Lainey's eyes were glowing and she was speaking another language. How could Mom have gone her whole life not knowing? Kieran asked, her voice hushed. Your mother? No. But Elsa suspected, Vidar said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. She was an inquisitive child. But we ensured she could live her life without the crushing weight of our world bearing down on her. Our mother recognized you, and the protection hand gesture you two shared, Delaney said. Are you sure she knows nothing? Solvay took Delaney's hands in hers, her grip firm despite a visible tremor. Your mother only remembers what I have allowed. She does not know the full length of which you now do. Listen carefully. You and Kieran, you both carry this legacy. I did not go with you to retrieve the box, because I knew you would go to Kieran. And I needed you to open the box together because we needed to know if Kieran was ready. The strength of our bloodline was tested, and today, you've both proven yourselves stronger than we imagined. The stone chose you both because it sensed that strength within you from our blood and the blood of your father. It's in your DNA, in your very essence, and in the unbreakable bond you share. You are now the guardians of the Veil. Vidar glanced at Solveig, his expression a complex mix of regret and unwavering resolve. We must go, he said, his voice a gentle rumble. The Veil is stable now, but it will require our constant vigilance on the other side to ensure it remains so. At his words, Solveig stepped forward, her hands rising slowly, her fingers gracefully weaved through the air as if pulling at invisible threads. She almost looked as though she were dancing. Light began to spill from the space between them, thin at first, then swelling into a swirling aperture of silver and shadow. The air bent and shimmered, rippling like water disturbed by a stone, until a fully formed portal hung before them. Wait, but we have so many more questions. How do we do this? Are we the only ones? Kieran asked. Sylvie cupped Kieran's face gently, her palms warm against the cold tension in Kieran's jaw. Her thumb traced a soft, deliberate line across her cheekbone, as though memorizing the moment. Meet Barn. This is not goodbye, Sylvie whispered, her eyes shimmering with a luminous depth that seemed to see beyond time itself. You have the strength to protect this world, Kieran. And we will always be watching, guiding you when we can. Even when you don't know it. Kieran's lips parted, a protest lingering there, but no sound came. So she just nodded, leaning into Sylvie's touch. Delaney stood a few paces away, her fists clenched as tears blurred her vision, turning the scene into a hazy dance of light and shadow. Vidar and Solveig stood together, their silhouettes framed by the veil's tattered edges, a portal no longer pulsing but quietly unraveling into glistening fragments of gold and silver. Vidar's hand rested gently on Solveig's back as they began to step backward, their figures slowly dissolving into the glowing fissure. But just before they were consumed entirely by the blinding radiance, Solveig paused. She turned, her gaze locking with Delaney's across the crumbling debris and the hush of the ruined hospital. Her smile was gentle, yet it held the gravity of countless untold stories, threads of ancestral pride woven with generations of quiet sacrifice. You are ready, Solveig said, her voice so soft it felt like a breath, yet it carried through the stillness with a precision that made Delaney's chest tighten. This is not goodbye. The veil pulsed, once, twice, before collapsing into a final, blinding flash of golden light that bathed the room in a warmth both otherworldly and achingly human. The light pressed against their skin, like a final embrace, before it vanished completely, leaving behind only motes of dust floating in the now dim, eerie silence. Delaney's breath shuddered as she looked toward Kieran, whose shoulders had squared despite the wet glisten on her cheeks. The hospital, with its decayed walls and skeletal beams, felt both vast and suffocating, a mausoleum of what had been and a cradle for what was to come. And yet, amidst the debris and silence, there was something unspoken passing between them, a tether of purpose, raw and unpolished, but unbreakable. Kieran reached for Delaney's hand, their fingers lacing together in a quiet promise. No words passed between them, none could match the moment. Together, they turned from the empty space where the veil had been and the hollow shell of the hospital, carrying the weight of goodbye and the fragile, stubborn spark of a destiny too big to fathom. After the battle, Delaney drove Kieran home, the silence in the car a stark contrast to the chaos they had just endured. Then, she headed home, exhaustion pulling at her like a lead weight. The moment she fell onto her bed, still in her clothes, a memory rushed to the forefront of her mind, vivid and startlingly clear, like a forgotten film reel suddenly playing with perfect clarity. It was Christmas Eve, the memory that haunted her, but this time, she saw it all, every terrifying detail. The white French doors creaked open, revealing the creature. It stepped into the dimly lit room, impossibly tall, its elongated limbs bending and twisting at unnatural angles. A translucent, featureless face gleamed faintly, like pale wax under the faint glow of distant Christmas lights. Long, jagged fingers stretched out, tipped with nails that curved like sickles. Its spindly frame shifted unnervingly, as though its very presence distorted reality, creating ripples in the air around it. The creature's movements were slow and deliberate, savoring its approach. its hollow gaze fixed on 7-year-old Delaney, who clutched the stone tightly in her small hand, her knuckles white with a child's primal fear. Shadows writhed around its form, stretching and recoiling, giving the creature an almost fluid, ghostly quality. Just as it leaned forward, its grotesque hand reaching for the stone, a warm, radiant light flooded the room. Solveig stepped through, her figure glowing with an ethereal golden energy. Her sudden, powerful presence forced the creature to freeze mid-motion, its grotesque hand suspended in the air. A low, guttural hiss escaped its hollow face, a sound that reverberated deep in Delaney's chest, chilling her to the core. The creature recoiled sharply as Solveig stepped between it and the frightened girls, her light intensifying until it forced the monstrous being back through the French doors. With a final, furious glare of defiance, it retreated into the swirling shadows, its spindly limbs collapsing into the black void from which it came. Solveig turned to the terrified girls and knelt beside them. She gently touched their foreheads, her soothing light calming their racing hearts. The terror in their eyes faded as they drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Vidar moved with surprising gentleness, his massive arms enveloping both girls as he lifted them effortlessly, one in each arm. He settled them back into their beds with the tenderness of someone who possessed not only the strength of giants, but the heart to match. After carefully tucking True in, ensuring she was safe and warm, he gave a soft nod and stepped back, his watchful eyes never leaving them. Solveig, with a quiet grace, stepped to Delaney's side and eased the stone from her small, trusting hand. Delaney's eyes fluttered open at the touch, pale with drowsiness, only to widen as Solveig placed her palm at the center of her chest. For a heartbeat, her eyes blazed white, an otherworldly light flickering from within, before they shut again, and she sank into sleep as if pulled under by a warm tide. Solveig gently smoothed the blankets over both girls, then brought her hands together, forming the protective symbol and pressing it over her own heart. From the doorway, Vidar smirked mischievously. "Definitely our blood. She reminds me of Elsa," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Solveig's voice was calm but resolute as she spoke to Vidar, who stood watchfully nearby. "I'm going to put this away," she murmured. "She's too young to understand its true strength. She'll find it when the time is right. She'll know it was meant for her, and she won't let it go. I'll test her myself, in time." Vidar nodded solemnly, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Together, they left the children's room, Solveig cradling the stone knowing it held the weight of the world, and the fate of many generations. Delaney woke with the dream still clinging to her, vivid and unshakable. She saw Solveig's fearless light and Vidar's unyielding strength, the memory of them, her great-grandparents, standing between her and the darkness brought both tears and joy. They had been her shield, but the time had come. Now, she and Kieran would be the protectors, and they would stand watch. For the first time since this all began, it all clicked into place. She wasn't lost. Everything she had felt the past few months, the forgotten memories, they were all connected. It was destiny. She was right where she's supposed to be. She was a guardian of the veil. Now she just needed to find out what that really meant for her. And the future.
We hope you enjoyed Blood and Stone Origin, the first story in Lena Simone's dark fantasy short story series. Stay tuned for the next installment, Sand and Stone, coming soon. If you enjoyed this video, we would love for you to hit the like, leave a comment, share the video, and most of all, subscribe, and turn your notifications on, so you never miss an announcement or story drop. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for the latest updates. Thanks for listening with us at Gales of Tales. Farewell, Ravens. You know how the saying goes. May these tales linger until the next gale arrives.